Cool. Back again.
Back again.
2024.
Yeah, a new year.
Yeah.
So we took a break last month, but we took on a bit of a more challenging book this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were chatting about it now and saying that it's been quite a difficult read.
Yeah.
I don't think it's because of the content's lack of interestingness, but just because of all the scientific terms and all of that kind of stuff.
And I think the style of writing was very different to what we used to.
Yeah.
Like you said, very scientific. So
Yeah.
it was. Yeah, it felt like I was back at varsity reading articles.
back in the lab.
Yeah. But yeah, it was. Yeah, like I explained it to you, it was brutal, but I think one of the more helpful, eye-opening books we've read to date, in my opinion.
So what is this book that we're talking about?
Go for it.
So the book is called How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. I'll give a quick summary and then we can dig into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so How Emotions Are Made is a book by Lisa Feldman Barrett, a distinguished professor of psychology and a neuroscience researcher. This book delves into Barrett's theory of constructed emotions, offering a fresh perspective on how emotions are formed. Initially, the book presents the classical view of emotions, which suggests that emotions are simply reactions to external events. Something happens, and as a result, we feel a certain way. In the classical view, these emotions are thought to have distinct markers in the brain, akin to a fingerprint. For example, it is often said that the amygdala is the center of fear in the brain. The book then goes on to discuss the recent research that challenges this classical view, advocating for the theory of constructed emotions. This theory proposes that emotions aren't mere reactions. Instead, they are complex predictions shaped by our past experiences and current context. According to this theory, we perceive and experience these predictions as reality, rather than experiencing the raw sensory input as reality. This theory suggests that our emotions, and even our perception of reality, are essentially a continuous flow of these constructed perceptions. In the concluding chapters, Barrett explores the broad implications of this theory on various aspects of life, including health, law, and our general understanding of the world around us. So yeah, it's quite a mind-bending, challenging thing to like wrap our head around. Because I think we're used to that classical view.
Yeah. I think it's bringing a view that you cannot entirely dismiss, but actually pay more attention to. I think that's that was the outcome after reading the book for me. Because I mean, like you're saying, for myself, before this point, there was a way in which I thought our brains work or how emotions work and stuff like that. I had a different perspective of it. And I mean, you brought it up briefly before we read the book of some interesting things that you had come across the first time you listened to it. But having read it, it's like, just having that bulb go off or go on and be like, okay, is that how emotions are made? It's how not just emotions, but is that how the thinking process sort of goes like? I mean, we did a book on thinking and
how to think.
And that was at a very high level, nothing as deep as, where it all stems from.
What is the circuitry in your brain that is causing this? I think that was a helpful book on just like the practical
Yeah.
implications. And I mean, she does touch on the practical implications, but like you say, this book is a lot more theoretical, which is partly why it was much more difficult for us to understand. And hopefully we can clear up some of the difficult concepts, but it is still a challenging one. And and also something to keep in mind is that it is just a theory of emotion. As with most things, they are theories, and people come along in future generations and say, oh, okay, wait, well, this doesn't quite align with that. And they have to then come up with a new theory. So this theory, though, seems to be the one that current, I think it's called affect scientists, but if essentially like emotion scientists seemingly are leaning towards more now.
But I mean, she did mention on how there's this kind of cycle where people push one narrative, and like years ago, researchers put into this thing on how emotions are made and how they're described and stuff, and which is essentially the classical view, which she refutes, but not refutes, but kind of.
I think she refutes it.
Yeah, I was right.
Well, you can agree or disagree with her, but she is definitely on the side of that's wrong.
I do want to be very extreme on what I say. I'm trying to pick my words carefully here. But she kind of says on how that research, which she says is extensive research, came to a similar conclusion.
Yeah, but 100 years ago?
Yeah, and people essentially forgot about it, and like, decades later, not even, years later, people are embarking on that same research, wasting, as she put it, people are wasting money with this research, yet, she thinks that people need to lean towards,
the constructed theory. So just to clear things up, because that summary, maybe some people like immediately understood it. I'm sure it's confusing, and it took. I don't know how it was for you, but it took me many hours to really be like, oh, okay, I think I get what she's saying. It's fairly straightforward, but it was quite difficult.
I should admit, even now, that's probably the most confusing piece of work that I've gone through.
And it's not you, Lisa, it's us.
Oh, is it? But yeah, it's got some interesting views, to say the least. And I think we'll dive deeper into them. But I mean, even before we were discussing certain things, and the words we're using to kind of put the same point across was very different. And one person would speak and then eventually I'll be like, oh, okay, I get now what you're trying to say. Yeah. And it's that was the book for me in its entirety. So I hope, and just know that this is our understanding of the text, right? And not exactly what she's trying to put across. So if we somehow misquote or say something that's different to our views, blame her, not us. But we'll try our best, to put across our understanding as best we can.
Yeah, I think that's a good caveat. So maybe just quickly to start, before we start digging into things, because we'll break it down into 3 sections and we'll discuss it and that. But just before we even dig into that, I think a useful thing to keep in mind, and we'll probably touch on it in various ways, but is the idea of the classical view of emotions is essentially reactive. So something happens in the world and we react to it. The idea of constructed emotion is more along the lines of prediction. So we predict what is going to happen, and the prediction is our perception. We perceive what we predict. And then the sensory input comes in, and our brains tweak over time to match, to reduce that prediction error. But a difficult concept to grasp in one sentence, but the prediction is the reality that we experience, is what Lisa is saying. And I think, having read this, I lean towards that view now. I have for a fair bit of time from the initial reading, but now rereading it, I think it's sort of like, it makes sense to me. But it is a difficult thing to grasp because we think that we are seeing the physical stuff around us.
I think the one, sorry to interject there, but one thing that was very interesting to me was she mentioned, and it kind of touches on what you're saying about what our reality is, what we merely perceive, or what we've predicted, and we construct our reality to be. And the one thing was how we create our own environments. I don't know if you remember that section. And I was like, it was very interesting to be like, to me when I read that, I was like, whatever situation we find ourselves in, as much as we are probably reacting to some sort of input, not trying to mix the two. I know I'm using words that are very similar, but what I'm trying to say is that whatever we experience, and like you said, based on our predictions and our experiences, based on our experience, we then predict, and from that prediction kind of create our environment. And in essence, I'm not take this with a pinch of salt, but in whatever situation you find yourself in, as much as the external factors, but the level at which or how deep down you go down that rabbit hole is mainly caused by you. I don't know if I'm making sense. It's you creating that space. And I think later on, I think she speaks about how though when she's talking about anxiety and depression, it's about how you decide whether to go on thinking certain thoughts and making a pathway, or let's say activating those neurons that create a pathway, or immediately stopping so that you don't create that pathway. I don't know if
what you're saying makes sense. I think what you to just clarify what you're saying, you're not saying that the past that you have doesn't affect your experience. So you don't have like full control, because you have a past and maybe you were raised poorly by your parents or raised really well or something, and that has an effect. But I think what you're getting is that we have more control over our emotions and the way that we react and the things that we do than we think that we do.
Like kind of, so what I'm like helping ourselves out of that situation. It's merely we need to sort of, I
think maybe like a phrase would be like we can retrain our predictions.
Yes. Not saying it's wrong, but in a better way.
Okay, so should we dig into the 3 different parts?
Yeah.
So we're going to break it down in chapters. So chapter 1 to 3 is just general, like going over and getting a general feeling. So it's kind of stuff that we've now discussed a bit, but just getting a general feeling for what's going on, what's the language that's used, and trying to clear up some ideas. And then the next part is chapter 4 to 8, which is talking about feelings, and then based off of feelings, how emotions are made. So that's like kind of the central part of it. And then towards the end of the book, chapter 9 to 13, is what does this mean for us? So we'll look at, based off of this theory, how does that affect us and what should we do about it? Okay, so general, classical versus constructed view. So in the introduction on page X, she says, the time-honed story of emotion goes something like this. We all have emotions built in from birth. They are distinct, recognizable phenomena inside of us. When something happens in the world, whether it's a a gunshot or a flirtatious glance, our emotions come on quickly and automatically, as if someone has flipped a switch. We broadcast emotions on our faces by the way of smiles and frowns and scowls and other characteristic expressions that anyone can easily recognize. Our voices reveal emotions through laughter, shouts, and cries. Our body posture betrays our feeling with every gesture and slouch. So that's the classical view of emotion. And then contrasting that is the constructed theory of emotion. So it says at the bottom of that page, it says, so what are they really? What are emotions really? When scientists set aside the classical view and just look at the data, a radically different explanation for emotion comes to light. In short, we find that your emotions are not built in, but made from more basic parts. They are not universal, but vary from culture to culture. They are not triggered, you create them. They emerge as a combination of physical properties in your body, a flexible brain that rewires itself to whatever environment it develops in, and your culture and upbringing, which provide that environment. Emotions are real, but not in the objective sense that molecules and neurons are real. They are real in the same sense that money is real. It's a hardy illusion, but a product of human agreement. It's hardly an illusion, but a product of human agreement. And that's the theory of constructed emotion. So, yeah. I don't know if you have any comments there, Peter. But
no, I can
go on to the next part. So, something that's useful that we've discussed a little bit is the idea of the faces. So, there's the set of basic emotions that the classical method uses often. And it's on page 5 of the book, where they have these different facial expressions, and you can think of them as the ideal forms, if you were Plato. You can think of them the ideal forms of emotion. So one would be the smile. So smile, instantly people in the Western world Western culture will say, well, of course a smile means you're happy. And it's very tightly associated with happiness. And the same with a frown means you're sad. And she kind of digs into that a little bit, and we won't, I think, dig into it too much. But at the end of the day, what she gets to is that the idea of variability, not one single thing, is the norm. And that kind of pushes you slowly away, not fully, but it slowly nudges you away from the classical view, because the classical view kind of, both on physical features and also in the head, the classical view kind of says, no, there's fingerprints.
Yeah. And pretty much like a one-to-one relationship between how you feel and how the expression you have on your face.
Exactly, yeah. That's a very good way of putting it, a one-to-one expression. So at one part of the book it says here, I think it's page 11, nearly 3/4, so they do a test, and then what they say here is that nearly 3/4 of our subjects who saw her face alone rated it as sad. So there's a frowning face, let's say. Nearly 3/4 of them rated it as sad, but when presented with the scenario, 70% of subjects rated her face as displaying fear. So basically, when they were given the context, they changed their prediction, which is kind of strange, because what the classical view sort of leans towards is saying, no, you can look at someone and then immediately you say, okay, well, this is the situation, they're sad or they're happy. But already we see, okay, well, there's some nuance there. The environment also kind of, the context also kind of plays a role. And so it says here, this variation held true for every emotion that we studied. An emotion like fear does not have a single expression, but a diverse population of facial movements that vary from one situation to the next. So what you were saying is that the classical view is that 1-to-1, whereas this is saying no, it's more like 1-to-many. And so the term that they often use here is variation is the norm. And it's an interesting idea, but it's somewhat intuitive as well. Like, I think we experience people and the way that they react to situations, and we know that they're happy, but maybe one person might smile, but another person might just look almost content to us, like what we would classically consider as content. Or sometimes if someone just has a certain type of face, they might look like they're sad, but they're actually happy. Then the idea behind that variance and that is something called degeneracy. So the comment that she makes here is that one of the most surprising things I learned as I began to study the neuroscience is that a mental event such as fear is not created by only one set of neurons. Instead, combinations of different neurons create instances of fear. Neuroscientists call this principle degeneracy. Degeneracy means many to one. Many combinations of neurons can produce the same outcome. I think it's helpful to understand those ideas.
I think it's like you said, the idea of one emotion can be represented by many feelings within you. Like you're saying, that the classic view would say just because you're smiling means you're happy, but with the other view, it's rather saying like you can smile in cases where you're not happy. You can be very angry, but you actually smile, maybe as that you kind of calm yourself down in that sort of situation. But just because people are leaning towards a fingerprint of emotions, or to kind of say if you showing this face, then it means you're happy or sad, then that would leave people confused. But like you're saying, it's like we, based on experiences and experiencing others, then we are able to use other factors to kind of have an imagination of what someone might be feeling. And
I think it's not so apparent to us that emotions don't have fingerprints, or that they're not like inborn, because of the fact that we don't that often experience vastly different cultures. And even if we do experience vastly different cultures, we normally don't have the ability to speak their language fluently. And so we can't really understand their emotions. So we look at them and we see them smiling or frowning or this, and we make inferences, we make judgments about like, this is what they're feeling. And the difficulty as well is that later we'll chat a little bit about the whole idea of emotions as categories, but then also emotions as a social thing. So it's a social reality. And the reason why that's important to realize is because if we think about emotions as social realities, we are in a very, in quotes, fixed social reality. So we might have a partner and we can recognize that partner's emotions very easily because of the fact that we're so attuned to them. Our predictions of their mental state is actually quite good because we've been corrected enough times to be like, oh, okay, this is what, when they look like this or act like this, this is how they feel. And then we kind of take that out from our families and our friends, and then we go and try and apply that same ability to predict another person's feelings. Not that we're perfect at predicting our partner's feelings or this or that, but we take that same concept and we go and try and predict, if we're a security person, and we try and predict like the face of that person looks like they are upset and they're going to attack or something.
And then you get it completely wrong.
Yeah. Then, so another comment that she makes, so this is all part of that like general understanding. On page 23, she says, what we colloquially call emotions, such as anger, fear, happiness, are better thought of as emotion categories. Each is a collection of diverse instances. So that's that idea of degeneration or degenerative brain patterns, where there's different like routes to get to the same emotion, and we categorize those in certain ways. And again, we'll touch on that in the next section. Then a last point before we move on from the general part is this idea of like trying to get a grip of how we can think about it. Because again, maybe for some people it's intuitive. I know, again, for Peter and I it wasn't. And so one of the tools that she uses is images, visual images. Two specific ones. One we'll chat about later, which is rainbows. And the one that we'll look at now is just an image of effectively blobs. It's just random blobs on a page. And then she says something along the lines of, when you look at these blobs, your brain doesn't have any concept or category for understanding these blobs. And so it just sees them as blobs. But then on the next page, she says, this is actually a bee. And then you look again at the blobs and you can't see anything but a bee. And it's almost now impossible to go back to just seeing it as blobs, because now our predictions have been, in quotes, corrected. The error there's an error that was fixed, but it's not. In this case, it's an interesting one because it's the idea of it is like, is there really blobs there, or is it really a bee? And there really are blobs, but we really can predict the bee. And so it's the reason why it's a helpful analogy is because, one, it helps us to get an intuitive feel for the fact that our brains are prediction machines. There really isn't a bee there, but our brains are predicting that there is. But then on the other hand, it helps us also see the possibility for where mistakes can be made. Because maybe our brains really start latching onto this idea that there's a bee there. And for this purpose, it's not really an issue. But if it's the case of like an illness or something like that, then it can become problematic because now we're holding on to a false prediction and we can't escape it.
To add on to that, I think that was also a good, depending on how you look at it, a good example on how you cannot identify emotion, or let's say feelings that you've never experienced.
I think, to rephrase it, she normally would say something along the lines of, you can't experience emotions that you don't have the categories or the words.
I know that's a deeper level at which you want to stay in tune in, but I'm just saying on a high level, kind of not digging deep, like that's just a perfect example to be like, if you don't know something unless you experience it, is what I'm trying to say. So it's like you experience the blobs as just blobs, but then just because you've got more information regarding it, like you're saying, then your predictions about it change, and now all of a sudden all you can see is a bee. So what I'm trying to say is, like, let's say I'm trying to, and I don't point this as, but you've never lost a family member, for instance. You know the feeling because you know that, okay, I'm feeling this way because I've lost it, and you kind of attach that feeling to the situation. But in that moment, that emotion is new to you. Like it's the first time you're actually experiencing it. And only after that are you able to say, attach that to loss, for instance. But initially, loss was probably just a loss of maybe your keys, but you never knew that there was also another dimension, if I may, just to use that term lightly, to loss, and that's a result of losing a family member.
I think I get what you're saying. So say for example, it's the first time you're experiencing it. Then your prediction for the way that your body should feel is quite off, because
it's incorrect.
It's a drastic change to everything about your situation, especially if it's like a close family member or partner, because they actually are in the environment with you. They affect you day to day and stuff like that. So it has an effect on the way that you will feel, and your body predicts that you will feel certain ways, but you actually end up feeling a lot worse because that person calibrated your body budget and stuff we'll get into later. But then as you experience more loss, so maybe by the time you're 90 and a bunch of your friends have died and things like that, it's sad, but it's not as traumatic. It's just like, I understand that that's a part of life, and it's because your body is your mind is getting better at predicting what the emotions are, and you're able to better understand and categorize, and then your body can predict how the body budget needs to change, which then affects how you feel and all of those kind of things.
Along those lines. But yeah, so it was just, we tried to paint a different picture of the picture that we had before us, that in terms of the picture, like if you look at it, it's a whole bunch of nothingness. Like, I mean, I looked at it when I was getting there, like I just didn't understand what all this
where's she going to?
You know, and then when you read, and like you said, it's like, now I cannot unsee the bee, which, and I couldn't see before. I was actually telling James that I actually want to conduct that experiment, to show someone the image and be like, what do you think this is? And if they can't, and then say what it is and see if they actually see the bee in it. Because it's quite interesting and frightening.
It's wild. So that bee is a helpful tool for trying to get a better sense of it's a very visceral idea of like what it actually means to predict and learn new categories and things like that. And then the last thing in that general section is inborn and universal versus social reality. But let me just read something else quickly before we get there. So on page 30, she says, your brain makes meaning from an aching stomach together with the sensations from the world around you by constructing an instance of that concept, an instance of emotion. And that might just be how emotions are made. So that's what she's leaning towards. And then this is an example that she gives, which I think is very, very relatable. When I was back in graduate school, a guy in my psychology program asked me out on a date. I didn't know him very well and was reluctant to go because honestly, I wasn't particularly attracted to him. But I had been cooped up for too long in the lab that day, so I agreed. As we sat together in a coffee shop, to my surprise, I felt my face flush several times as we spoke. My stomach fluttered and I started having trouble concentrating. Okay, I realized I was wrong. Clearly, I'm attracted to him. We parted an hour later. After that, I agreed to go out on a date with him again. I headed home intrigued. I walked to my apartment, dropped my keys on the floor, and threw up, and spent the next 7 days in bed with the flu. The same neural process of construction that simulates a bee from blobs also constructs feeling of attraction from a fluttering stomach and a flushed face. An emotion is your brain's creation of what your body sensations mean in relation to what's going on around you in the world. I call this explanation the theory of constructed emotion. So it's relatable because we can understand that feeling of like in our stomach, there's something wrong. And then whether it's going on a date or someone walks into the room, or a relevant example would be now, like it's very hot. And so when it's hot, you think, okay, like, oh man, I'm so frustrated. But actually, no, it might just be that it's hot. And then your brain is predicting that you, because of your body and that internal feeling, your brain is predicting that you must be feeling frustrated or irritable or something like that. But actually, it's just heat, and you are confusing the two.
In a nutshell, that is what I was trying to explain earlier. Like the whole, for her, it was like that whole experience of like, oh, just because I'm feeling a little different now in this person's presence, then it must be that I'm attracted to them, but in turn they're actually sick.
It's another very helpful example. Okay, then lastly,
just before you move on, if you go further, there's just that little section on page 31 where it says, in every waking moment, your brain uses past experience organized as concept to guide your actions and give your sensations meaning. When the concepts involved are emotion concepts, your brain constructs instances of emotions. So that was just after that section you read, that was like a follow-up section that she added, which is what we were talking about before, that more like the new age view of emotions is more that it comes from past experiences. So essentially your emotions or thoughts, for you to identify them, and we've spoken this before, is that you have a prediction of this is what I'm thinking, or this is how I'm feeling, and then if it's wrong, then whatever input that comes in, it's helpful to correct you, that when the next time you feel that way, then you're able to predict and correctly predict what emotion it is and what you're feeling.
So then going on to the last part is that social idea. So inborn and universal versus social reality. So she touches on this in this way. On page 38, it says, the final major assumption in the classical view is that certain emotions are inborn and universal. All healthy people around the world are supposed to display them and recognize them. The theory of constructed emotion, in contrast, proposes that emotions are not inborn, and if they are universal, it's due to shared concepts. What is universal is the ability to form concepts that make our physical sensations meaningful. From the Western concept sadness to the Dutch concept gezellig, which is a specific experience of comfort with friends, which has no exact translation in English. So, we use these words to construct these instances of emotion. And then she goes on to say on the next page, 39, social reality is not just about words. It gets under your skin. If you perceive the same baked good as a decent cupcake or a healthy muffin, research suggests that your body metabolizes it differently. Likewise, the words and concepts of your culture help you to shape your brain wiring and your physical changes during emotion. So it's all of these things have ramifications, I guess.
I mean, on the same page 39, I think at the top there, talks about the muffin cupcake distinction is a social reality.
Yeah.
That essentially they're all made through a similar process, but it's just by saying one's a cupcake, one's a muffin, then one's like a breakfast food and one's a dessert. That's how she, even though I think some cultures have cupcakes for breakfast.
Because it's basically just muffins with a different word. Yeah, I'm not a baker, but I mean, it seems like they are pretty much the same ingredients, and they just like maybe packaged differently or things. But it's wild to think that if they were the same ingredients and your body actually metabolizes them differently based off of your understanding of it.
Yeah.
Which I guess, as you start to understand more of the whole prediction thing, kind of makes sense, because your brain, it's not just emotions that are predicted, like we were saying. It's your visual input and all those kind of things, like with the bee, it's all predictions. And so therefore, if your brain is doing these predictions, when you see a muffin versus a cupcake, the cupcake you imagine as having far more sugar or this or that, and being more unhealthy, and the muffin you view as being more healthy. And so your brain will have different predictions for them. And so your brain will prep your metabolism in different ways. Yeah. Prediction all the way down. Okay, should we go on to the next part?
Yeah.
So we've now kind of got a general basis for the different things that we'll discuss. And so this next section is the next main section. So that was the general part. Now it's how feelings work and how emotions are made. So in this research, she distinguishes between feelings and emotions. So feelings are more inbuilt. They much less. Let me maybe explain them, and then I will dig into that. So, or actually no. Let's start at the beginning, and then we can go forward. But in summary, feelings are more. They're not as socially constructed. They're more just how we feel, like it's good or bad kind of thing. And then emotions are more categories of different complex feelings of body states and that. Okay, so first off, she says here, brain regions were thought to be primarily reactive, spending most of their time dormant and awaking to fire only when stimulus arrives from the outside world. The stimulus response view is simple and intuitive, and in fact, neurons in your muscles work this way, lying still and unstimulated and then firing to make a cell response. So scientists assumed that neurons in our brain operate the same way. So if we look at muscles, it is that reactive thing. But like we've been saying, we're starting to see that it's not the same for emotions. And then she says on page 59, through prediction, your brain constructs the world you experience. She says, prediction is such a fundamental activity of the human brain that some scientists consider it the brain's primary mode of operation. So an interesting idea that like we've been saying, from the visual to the sensory to the way that your metabolism works to the way that your emotions are constructed, it's predictive.
Yeah.
And many scientists seemingly will take that view nowadays. And then she goes on to comment along the lines of, sometimes those predictions do go right. They're not always perfect.
Yeah.
So she says here on page 62, you might think that your predictions of the world are driven by events in the world, but really they are anchored in your predictions, which are then tested against those little skipping stones of incoming sensory input. The reason she says that is just like mentioned earlier, your brain's default mode is prediction.
Yeah.
So when there's an error in the prediction, then which is a discrepancy between the input and what you predicted, then that is a small little, what she says here, skipping stone. Because normally these prediction errors are very small.
Yeah.
Like if you think about looking out into the world, when you look around, most of the stuff remains the same.
Yeah.
So your brain can predict and
has a baseline essentially of what it needs to see.
exactly, yeah. And then when something comes bam out of the corner of your eye, then that's the thing that will be like, oh, okay, there's a change there. And then if it was a surprising thing, it probably didn't predict it.
I was actually thinking about when I was reading that section, it reminded me, I was just like my commute to work and back. I was like, probably because I've done it probably now, 2 years almost every day. It's like, I was like, oh, that actually makes sense. Is that whatever building or house or whatnot pretty much is not me processing new information.
Yeah.
But the different vehicles that go past, it's like, probably it would be like, yesterday you had no obstruction view to the house, but now you can't see the house fully because there's this vehicle, and then you're like, let's adjust. What is it that's different now? Then that's when you can see the vehicle passing.
Yeah.
And it's what you're saying that, you might use the same route every day, then next minute, bam, something jumps out at you, and then your brain, like, instead of you, let's say you were taking a turn to your place, now then you don't take that same turn, or you have to avoid whatever just
or there's a block that's blocking the way from the turn that you normally take and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to think, like, if you take a long trip or something that you take frequently, like, okay, your trip to work is short, but that time just sort of disappears, and it most likely is in part due to that prediction. It's just your brain is just carrying on. It's like, cool, I know what's happening here, no worries, just keep on going. And then it's only if you see, like, I don't know, massive yellow truck coming head towards you, then you're like, oh, flip. And your brain starts to say, okay, that's a prediction error. I did not expect that.
Yeah.
And then it starts to adjust body budgets and yeah.
And not only that, like, that also, for me, was like, is that why a new trip, this is for me, I don't know about you, I know you don't like traveling as much as I do, but a new route is always very exciting for me. Like, unless I'm like really tired or not feeling well, if I'm going somewhere for the first time, I won't sleep. Like, I will try and absorb and it's like so into, because it's like everything is very new, like I've never seen before. Up until you've done the trip 1 or 2 times, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm used to this. But usually my first
it's a thrill.
Yeah, it's like, the kid receiving candy at every turn. My brain's firing, and which makes sense now because it's like there's nothing for me to predict. It's like
there's
receiving.
There's nothing for you to correct in your prediction.
You're receiving a stream of information, or at every angle you're correcting, because all your predictions are likely going to be wrong.
Oh yeah. If it's a new experience,
it's a new experience.
Yeah, whereas day to day, there's nothing new for you to predict. So there's no like learning or changing. Yeah. It's interesting, and I think. As we start to discuss these things, I think you can start to see more and more her case for why emotions are constructed.
Within yourself as well.
Yeah. And okay, so reading that again, you might think that your perceptions of the world are driven by events in the world, but really they are anchored in your predictions. When you then test those predictions against the skipping stones of incoming sensory input, through prediction and correction, your brain continuously creates and revises the mental model of the world, your mental model of the world. But predictions aren't always correct. She gives an example sentence here. Once upon a time, in a magical kingdom far beyond the most distant mountains, there lived a beautiful princess who bled to death. Did you find that, she says, did you find that last 3 words unexpected? Those last 3 words unexpected? That's because your brain predicted incorrectly based on its stored knowledge of fairy tales. It made a prediction error and then adjusted its prediction in the blink of an eye to obviously learn what it should predict in the future. And most likely that kind of a sentence won't happen frequently, and so that prediction will, that change will sort of fade away because it will be rewritten by normal stories. But yeah, that's a little sample of prediction error.
But just before you move on, that figure on page 63 was actually very interesting. Just sort of like a map for yourself to be like, it all starts with prediction. You simulate the prediction, compare with what's coming in, and then resolve the error, and then the cycle continues. I think for me, that was quite of interesting. Image,
and it's something where that is happening super quickly, all the time. Which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I think earlier we spoke about that whole example of having a baseball thrown at you. If you had to react the moment you see the position of the ball to catch it, you'd never get to catch a ball. But just from the way the ball launches out from the guy throwing it, then you predict where the ball might be, then you put your hand there to expect the ball there to catch it. Then it's through that whole that you predicted that the ball would be there, and in turn you're able to catch it.
If we didn't have prediction, we wouldn't be able to catch it because it happens too quickly.
You'd react to the position and be like, the ball's there, let me catch it. Then every single time you'd be too slow to actually catch it.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of these things sort of pointing towards that construction idea. So then this is the affect part. So understanding what affect is, and affect is what we used the word of feelings earlier. So to dig into that, in scientific terms, affect comes in two states. And again, remember, affect is how you feel. Comes in two states. So or you can think about an X and a Y axis. On the X axis, you maybe put valence. And valence is basically either pleasant or unpleasant. And then on the y-axis, you can put arousal, which is a scientific term, and it means either calm or agitated. So those are the two extremes. So you can think of it as like these four different states, and you can be in combinations of them. So you can have you can be pleasant. You can have pleasant valence, and your arousal state can be calm, or you can have unpleasant, and then you sort of middle between calm and agitated, or you can be it would be interesting, but you could be calm and unpleasant. So there's all these different states. That's an unlikely one. But the important thing is that when you think of affect, you can think of very low granularity feeling, where you either feeling pleasant or unpleasant, and you're feeling calm or agitated. That's the state. And then the next part of the puzzle is this idea of introception. So introception is the sensation you have from inside. So inside, introception. And introception, along with affect, are kind of just fairly standard things that we have and lots of animals have as well, where our body is in a certain state and maybe our stomach is sore and therefore we feel unpleasant. Or we just found a chocolate and so we feel pleasant. Or we are relaxing on the couch and we feel calm. Maybe it would be calm and pleasant. So there's these different states, but that's feeling, and then the intrinsic circuitry in our brains helps us to understand what we are currently feeling. So, I bumped the mic there. But does that kind of make a bit of sense?
It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot. But yeah, I think the intrinsic also goes to like gut feel. I think that was just
that's a
something
good way of
else,
putting it, yeah.
and then your affect is more like your normal state at which you're at. And then depending on whether something happens, how it then deviates from that. So like that whole thing is talking about the mid arousal, high arousal, and you instead of affect, you're supposed to be in the default in the middle, and then as you going through, then that then changes to see in which quadrant you actually fall in.
Yeah, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, and calm or aroused.
Yeah.
So hopefully that kind of makes sense, because that
It
obviously
was a lot,
it obviously we build on the idea of feeling, or she builds on the idea of feelings to get to emotions.
Yeah.
So emotions are different in that they are more categorizing of various different parts of like feelings and brain states and all kinds of things. Whereas feelings are just like, are we feeling good or bad?
So it's this, I'll loosely use it as state. So the state in which you are in, which is how you're feeling, you can be categorized. And those categories within those different feelings are what emotions are, essentially. So one emotion can map to a different set of feelings. But yeah, the causes of those feelings may be very different. Like what you're saying, like happiness for one, but what causes you, or the feelings that make you happy can vary from like receiving a chocolate to you seeing your partner. But at the end result, you feel happy. But it's how you feel in the situation that then maps back to what emotion you're feeling, or what emotion state you're in.
Yeah. I think, and where it gets kind of confusing is that we often use the word feeling
and
for emotion.
Yeah, which I just did now.
Which is fine, I think, in general words, but when she's talking about it, it's like two different things. Where that the feeling is that just pleasant or unpleasant, aroused or calm, or what's it? Aroused or what's the other word for it? But it doesn't really matter too much. But yeah, feelings is that, and then emotions is that more complicated version. But another thing that she builds towards is, and we've spoken about it a bit, but I don't think we've really given a definition of it, is body budget. So I think it kind of intuitively, the words say what it is, but just to give it a definition, the idea of body budget is essentially a metaphor to describe how the brain manages the resources of the body. The brain acts like a financial manager who constantly makes deposits and withdrawals to and from different body systems to keep everything running smoothly. So a deposit into your body budget could be something like your dad comes home with chocolates and you're like, yes, this is exciting. And that is like a deposit. It adds to your body budget. You have more energy now. So whereas in contrast, if something happens, whether it's something very small like you stub your toe, or whether it's something big like you lose a family member, that then affects your body budget as well. Stubbing your toe, now all of a sudden your body needs to start dedicating resources to say, okay, well, Let's
Stop
make
the
sure that the
bleeding.
bleeding stops. Let's make sure that, or I suppose that kind of just happens, but I think you get the idea. And now you have to start looking after it, and you want to be aware of it, and things like that. And so it dedicates resources towards that, where and that's the sort of idea of a withdrawal from the body budget. So then to tie some of these concepts together, so we've spoken about affect, which is essentially just how you feel, and interoception, which is the internal feeling that you have, and then the body budget. And so she says here on page 73, interoception did not evolve for you to have feelings, but to regulate your body budget. So interoception, the way that your body is able to feel how it's, or able to understand how it's, the internal state is, that is there for regulating your body budget. And your affective feelings of pleasure or displeasure and calmness or agitation are simple summaries of your body budget state. So affects and body budget are very closely related, because if you are feeling good or you are feeling bad, then if you're feeling good, it means your body budget is in a good state, because that the feeling that you have there, the affect, is a summary of your body budget. It's a very high level summary. That's why she constantly says that's not, or she doesn't say it but implies that that's not emotion. It's just a summary of a certain state of your body, good or bad, and agitated or calm. And so just to reread that, interoception did not evolve for you to have feelings, but to regulate your body budget. And your affective feelings of pleasure or displeasure, calmness or agitation are simple summaries of your body budget state. I think it's very helpful to understand. But yeah. I don't know if you have any comments there or...
No.
Okay. Then a last thing with dealing with affect is an interesting idea called affective realism, or to put it in a different wording, feeling something and then making the mistake of thinking it's real. So affective realism, feeling, change the words, feeling realism. And she gives a good example here. So she says on page 74, affect has far-reaching consequences beyond simple feeling. The subject of this exact situation was the subject of a 2011 study of judges. Scientists in Israel found that judges were significantly more likely to deny parole to a prisoner if the hearing was just before lunchtime. The judges experienced their interoceptive sensations not as hunger, but as evidence for their parole decision. Immediately after lunch, the judges began granting paroles with a customary frequency. So the same idea as when she was going on that date and she mispredicted what she was feeling. It can happen that judges, and we were saying that we had seen this in a previous book as well, but this is a different perspective on the same problem, that the way that you feel can affect your predictions, and not just emotion predictions or that, although this has to do with emotions because it's the judges in a sense saying that they're not saying that they're hungry, they're saying that they are feeling unpleasant, and so therefore they associate that unpleasant feeling with the person on trial, and therefore they're more likely to say you deserve a higher sentence, where straight after lunch, once they've eaten, unknown to them, although it's becoming more and more known to judges, unknown to them, their state now, their body budget is in a better state, and so their affect, their feeling, is more sort of level or more pleasant, and so they don't have this negative almost sentiment, and so they don't project that onto other people.
Yeah, I wanted to say something, but I saw you course corrected there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's the whole thing of you make a prediction, but you're like, but I'm still. That's another way I'd explain it. That you predict something, but you're like, no, but I'm still feeling this way. So then you're like, no, I'm going to correct my prediction because of how I'm feeling. But what you're feeling in turn is not because of the case you're presiding, but more your internal feeling because you're hungry.
Introspective predictions. It's just to continue on with the effective realism.
Yeah, and sorry to stop you there. It's just it also then goes back to, again, I said when we're speaking, I said I won't use this word, but I'll use it again on how Hackers refutes the classical view that not only are your, let's say, your emotions or how you feel a summation of how you see someone, but that there are other factors that contribute to how you're feeling or what emotions you actually have. Because just in that, it would mean that people feeling hungry or feeling some type of, or even feeling ill wouldn't affect people's judgments, which is in turn how they feel towards something, which affects their emotion, and as a result, how they would judge something in the end. So yeah, it's one way to kind of prove a case to be like, no, just because you're smiling doesn't mean that you're happy, or just because you have a neutral face doesn't mean that you're neutral towards saying. There's all this sort of experiences that you've encountered that, you know, as a result, give you the right prediction or identify the right emotion.
Yeah, it's there's a funny thing that she says, which is that because of all of these different variations and predictions and things like that, she says that for medical, if you're going for an interview, that if it's a sunny day, then that's when you should go for your interviews, because people feel better on sunny days and normally people feel worse on like dreary rainy days. And so it's just funny how like it affects the world around us and how we act and do things.
I mean, I know I'm going off a tangent, but I remember chatting with a colleague before about that it's just the same as how human satisfaction actually is in terms of work. So people's satisfaction at work is actually higher in summer than it is in winter.
Yeah.
And yeah,
which I mean makes sense in this light.
It's not in this light.
Unintentional.
But yeah, it just ties into what you said. I'd rather go for an interview on a sunny day than on a gloomy.
Make sure you interview on a sunny day. Yeah. So the next part is just discussing a little bit more about body budget. So on page 77, she says here, your body budgeting regions are mostly like a deaf scientist. They make predictions, but they have a hard time listening to incoming evidence. So then she gives a further example. When you make a big deposit or withdrawal from your body budget, eating, exercising, injuring yourself, you might have to wait long for your brain to catch up. Marathon runners learn this. They feel agitated early in the race when their body budget is still solvent, i.e. they still have, so they can still go on running for a while, but they start off running and then they still feel very agitated. But they keep on running until the unpleasant feeling goes away. They ignore the affective realism that insists that they are out of energy. So because our body budget is slightly delayed in its so it makes predictions, and then it kind of sort of is like, cool, like, these are my predictions. And because of that, we can have a mismatch between how we're actually feeling and how we should feel based on our actual state. And so runners, like she's saying, learn this. If I just keep on pushing, my body will be like, okay, it's actually is fine. Like, it's not a problem. And the same thing with eating. If you eat very quickly, it takes a bit of time for your body budget to catch, or your predictions say that you need to keep eating, but you can actually stop, because actually, if you give your body budget a bit of time to sort of catch up with the state of reality,
20 minutes. So I probably need to have 20 minutes before your second serve. And I was like, oh, I'll be damned.
So I think it's what you feel. She says, you feel what your brain believes. Affect primarily comes from prediction. Now you know that the same is true for most feelings you've experienced in your life. Even the feeling of the pulse on your wrist is a simulation constructed in the sensory regions of your brain and corrected by sensory input. That was wild to me. Like, you put your finger on your wrist. You aren't actually feeling directly, like in the way that we normally think. You are predicting what you're going to feel. Then, over time, it will very quickly, as she said before, correct those predictions.
I was going to say, maybe that's even why, like, I mean, maybe even I experienced this, though. Like, growing up, when the, like, feel pulse, I would never actually feel anything. Yeah. Like,
it could just be that you're not feeling in the right place.
I could have also...
Could have been a prediction error.
It could have been that I also had a lot of padding around my wrist.
In my case, that probably was the case, yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so that's the concept of feelings and affect and the different parts of it, and body budgets and that. So we've dealt with feelings and affect, and now we're going to look at emotions and categories. Sometimes she says categories and concepts. There might be a distinction. There probably is a slight distinction between them, but for our purposes, we're going to pretend that there isn't. So first of all, we are constantly categorizing things. So the cool example on 84 is the rainbow. So there's pictures of two different rainbows. The rainbow, how we see it, and the rainbow, how it kind of more actually is. So when we look at a rainbow, we normally see a bunch of distinct colors, or fairly distinct colors. Maybe we don't see them as absolutely distinct, but like in general, most people see them as pretty distinct.
You can separate them, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And we normally see about 6, I can't even remember the colors, like, I don't know, green and blue and yellow and red and things. But we see these distinct colors. But actually, in reality, the rainbow isn't distinct
bands. It's actually a spectrum.
Exactly. It's like a continuous spectrum. But because we have very ingrained in our like general knowledge, the idea of red is a very distinct color, we then perceive that band, which is actually like it's ranging from red
group of frequencies
through all different colors until it reaches like a more orangey or whatever. Those are all actually completely distinct colors, but
different frequencies.
Different frequencies.
And it's carry on.
The scientist in you. Yeah, no, it's true. They're all different frequencies, and in theory, we should categorize each frequency
as its own.
But we can't do that because there's too many. So we do something that's useful, as humans do. We use words to group things together.
We group them.
And we say, this is red, when it's actually a whole spectrum of wavelengths. Varying frequencies of wavelengths.
Amuse me, please.
And so when we look, we see those distinct colors, which, and this ties very well
and
into...
I mean, what was interesting was then, which she added on to be like, for instance, in Russia, sky blue and dark blue are seen as two separate colors, and as a result, the rainbow has 7 as opposed to the 6 that,
because they have, it's not light and dark, it's distinct colors to them. Very interesting. Okay, so then she says here on 85, all sensory information is a massive, constantly changing puzzle for your brain to solve. And then she goes on to say, to achieve this magnificent feat, your brain employs concepts, or what we sometimes will refer to as categories, to make the sensory signals meaningful, creating an explanation for where they came from, what they refer to in the world, and how to act on them. Your predictions are so vivid and immediate that they compel you to believe you experience the world as it is, when actually you experience a world of your own construction, i.e. prediction. When you categorize using concepts, you go beyond the information that's available, just as you did when you perceived the bee within the blobs. Yeah, and then she says a little bit further down, categorization is business as usual for the brain, and it explains how emotions are made without needing fingerprints. To maybe throw a little bit of LLM talk and ChatGPT in there. So our brains are extremely efficient at predicting things, and they run on far less resources than computers do. And I think ChatGPT and those kind of things are quite good at categorizing things, but I think one of the things, and whether this is different from them or not, I'm not sure, but one of the things that makes our brains extremely efficient is the fact that we can use categorization to process. And if we didn't, just imagine, just look at it. If you look at the real world, that we don't really have the concept of pixels. So just to use an easy example, if you imagine a TV, there are millions of pixels on a TV. Like a standard HD TV or 4K TV. So standard HD TV is what? It's roughly, it's 180 by 1920, which is, my maths is terrible. Let's say 2 million pixels, okay? So 2 million pixels. Imagine your brain needed to individually say, this pixel is like this pixel is like this pixel is like this. It would take so much processing. And so instead what we do is we group things together. The example that she uses is you go into a store and you walking through the vegetable aisle or the fresh fruits aisle, and you see an apple. You know that there's an apple there. And so your brain can predict the concept of an apple. It doesn't have to go and render out individual apples and all of that stuff. As soon as you turn your focus towards them, maybe the predictions start becoming more real. But for your peripheral vision, it's probably sufficient just to predict
that there's
probably an apple there. And it's red. It's not a trillion frequency spectrum thing.
Of red. It might actually be brown.
Yeah, exactly. Based on your culture. Just explain that comment. It's a good one.
No, just because we perceive colors differently. So it might be a different shade of red. That it's not entirely solid red, but she mentioned that just because of how the light's hitting on the apple and the angle it reflects your eye, so the proper red, but might actually be brownish in color. So.
But also she mentions that thing about there's a culture, I can't remember what it is, but there's a culture that doesn't have a concept for red. And so they perceive, because red is in many ways close to brown. So there's a culture that literally doesn't perceive red as red. They perceive it as brown. Which is also like just another thing to add to the list of things for prediction. And the idea of categorization. Okay, so then going on, let me just turn over the page here. There's way too many things. Okay, so there's the concept of Schadenfreude. So concept learning doesn't stop in childhood; it continues throughout life. Sometimes a new emotion word appears in your primary language, engineering a new concept. For example, Schadenfreude is a German word meaning pleasure from someone else's misfortune. So, in summary, it's not to continue building the case. We aren't born with these emotions and understanding of emotions. We learn them over time. Normally, we learn most of our general emotion concepts from very young, but sometimes later in life, because they aren't just inborn, we can actually learn new emotion concepts. And Schadenfreude is one of them. And so Germans, we might say, I'm feeling pleasure, and I'm pleasure at that person's misfortune, which is a weird thing to say. But
which she kind of said that's not socially acceptable. That's one thing you need to add. That's why it's like a scapegoat.
It's funny, yeah. Because we in English, we would, sometimes people use the word Schadenfreude. Apparently in her context, it's more common. But so, and I think she's English. But we would use words like full sentences, and whereas in German they use Schadenfreude as a word, and therefore their brains can actually predict based off of Schadenfreude because it's a concept that they understand as a single thing rather than a whole collection of things.
For instance,
remember the whole idea of emotions are what's it? The word that she uses, diverse populations of perceptions or of feelings. So you have lots of different feelings, and they all categorize into one. The whole idea of degeneracy, that weird word that sounds like it's talking about someone that's degenerate, but actually it's talking about that many to one relationship.
I mean, even that, it's the same, like, I think she measures when you order in pizza. You don't call your pizza place and say, I want to order rolled out dough with tomato-based cheese and some meats on top. You know, we have a word for you to say that's pizza.
Yeah, that's a good one. We don't explain everything. We just have these concepts and they make sense to us, and it's very
they're word representative of certain concepts.
Okay, so then concepts and predictions, how do they relate to one another is another question. And on page 118 she addresses it. So she says, the two phenomena I've been discussing are actually one and the same. I'm speaking of concepts and predictions. When your brain constructs an instance of a concept such as happiness, it's equivalent to saying your brain issues a prediction of happiness. So the concepts that we use are the things that we use to predict. And so they are basically the same thing. The concept of apple is the thing that we use to predict apple. You put it like that, or when I put it like that, I think it makes sense. Then continuing on with this idea of categorization is when we look at different categories of things, remember the classical view would say sadness is a single thing, whereas the constructed view is like, well, it's more related to your experience and like what you've been taught when people say the word happiness or Schadenfreude or whatever, like what are the things that you associate with that, because that's what you will predict, because that's your learned experience. And so when looking at that, she uses to sort of clear that up, she uses the idea of flowers and weeds. So we naturally look at things and we say that's a flower or that's a weed. And we think that normally those things are very clearly distinct. But in reality, for example, daisies might not be... daisies can be considered flowers, but also in certain circumstances they can be pestilent and they can be taking over a garden, in which case the person would consider them a weed. And so she has a fun story here. If you doubt the power, it's on 131. If you doubt your power as a conjurer of reality, look at this figure. So it's just a figure of a Queen Anne's lace, which is a flower or weed. This plant is, I don't know, she says some scientific name, better known as Queen Anne's lace. Usually the outer blooms are white, but in rare cases they are pink. They reflect the light, they reflect a wavelength that people in my culture experience as pink, which is you'd be very proud, Peter. My friend Kevin once went to extraordinary lengths to purchase a pink Queen Anne's lace, which he planted proudly in the center of his garden. One day, he and I were having tea in his yard, and another friend stopped by. Kevin and I popped inside to get some tea for her. We returned just in time to watch the friend shake her head, stoop with deftness born of decades of experience, rip the Queen Anne's lace out from the ground. Nothing in the natural world indicates whether a plant is definitively a flower or a weed. A Queen Anne's lace is a flower to Kevin, but a weed to his friend. The distinction depends on the perceiver. And she says a little bit further down, emotions are real, but real in the same manner of the sound of the falling of a tree, the experience of red, and the distinction between flowers and weeds. They are all constructed in the brain of a perceiver. Yeah. Hectic.
Yeah.
Shall we go on to some ideas of social reality?
Yep.
So 134, emotions are social reality. We construct instances of emotion in the same manner as colors, falling trees, and money, using a conceptual system that is realized within the brain's wiring. So she's just kind of building on that case of emotions are something that it's categories, and the categories are learnt, and the learnt categories are learnt in social environments, and therefore what we perceive is not real reality, it's a social reality.
Social construct. Yeah.
Because an apple, there's no such, this is getting a little bit philosophical, but there's no such thing as an apple. It's a categorization that's useful to us. And we call it apple. And so in that sense, it is real. But in the sense of there's a red apple, there's no red. In the sense of apple, there's just lots of little particles of things and stuff. So, but I mean that
put together.
Yeah, someone can definitely debate that. So maybe don't hold on to that idea too tightly.
I can assist you down that rabbit hole.
there's that example that you used as the pizza thing, which is a really helpful example. We don't just go and say dough, this and that, cheese, and we just say pizza. Because pizza is a social reality that we all understand. Then on page 141, this brings us to one of the most challenging ideas in the book. You need an emotion concept in order to experience or perceive the associated emotion. Going to the next page, some scientists argue that without an emotion concept, an emotion still exists, but the affected person doesn't realize it, implying the state of emotion outside of consciousness.
Just to stop you, it was what I was also trying to explain about someone losing someone, but you've never lost someone. You don't know up until you
have the concept.
So you feel it, but it can be anything that people throw at you up until it's, in this case, a social contract to say if you've lost someone, then this is the emotion you feel.
And just to re-say what I said earlier, because now hopefully the idea of a body budget makes a little bit more sense. When you experience that the first time, your predictions are off, and so your body budget goes out of whack, and so you feel like really terrible and stuff like that. And then once you have more experience with that, even though it's a very sad and weird thing to have experience with, but once you have more experience with it, most likely your predictions will be more accurate, and therefore most likely your body budget won't be so far out of whack, and because you're better at predicting like what the state of things are going to be after that. But so she says, some scientists argue that without emotion concept, an emotion still exists, but the affected person doesn't realize it, implying a state of emotion outside of consciousness. I suppose this is a possibility, but I doubt it. If you had no concept of flower and someone showed you a rose, you'd experience only a plant, not a flower. No scientists would claim that you're seeing a flower just because you don't realize it. Similarly, the blobby image in chapter 2 doesn't have a hidden bee in it. You perceive the bee only because of conceptual knowledge. The same reasoning applies to emotions. Without the concept of, and she uses a few different emotion words, like sadness, and then she has one that's chiplessness, which is one that she defines earlier as sort of a joke and sort of not. That feeling where you don't have chips. To categorize with, if you don't have those concepts to categorize with, there is no emotion, only a pattern of signals. And then a little bit further down, you can predict only with the concepts you possess. Yeah. That's the thing that you were saying earlier. All right. Then there are some ideas for just different cultures and the social experience and that. And she says on page 148, if you found these ideas challenging, try this one. Some cherished Western emotion concepts are completely absent in other cultures. Itka, Eskimos, have no concept of anger. The Tahitians have no concept of sadness. This last item is difficult for Westerners to accept. Life without sadness, really. When Tahitians are in a situation that a Westerner would describe as sad, they feel ill, troubled, fatigued, or unenthusiastic, all of which are covered by their broader term, papea. So I'm not even going to try and defend her argument there, because I think it's really difficult to be like, okay, I think I really get that. But the important part is to see that what she's saying is the way that we categorize things, our understanding of the world based on the categories we've learned, not only informs us on an intellectual level of like, oh, okay, this is sadness or this isn't sadness. It actually allows us to feel certain things. So when she's saying that they don't feel sadness, she's not saying that they don't have some bodily sensations that we would be like, oh, okay, that's kind of similar to sadness. But she's saying that the experience that they have is different. It's not what we would be like, that's what we feel when we're sad. It's, yeah.
I was gonna just change something you said. It's not that they don't have the feeling. They don't have the concept.
Yeah. You got me. I was checking. I was testing you. Yeah. No, it's helpful to clear that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the concept that they don't have.
So they feel some odd way, which they do say.
They feel unpleasant.
They feel unpleasant.
Exactly, yeah.
But to them, they don't then say this unpleasant nature, it's sadness.
Yeah. But it's not just that they don't say that it is sadness. It's that the way that their brain is able to predict is different.
Yeah.
And so their predictions are different. And the way that they maybe... Sorry, go for it.
No, in other words, sadness just doesn't exist in their construct.
Yeah.
The feeling that we say, or which we identify as sadness, is there within them.
The feeling.
The feeling
on a very
is
technical word.
Is there. But the way they express it to them has nothing to do with that. Or has no association to sadness, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So I would agree. I'd say that when they experience this papaya, they would feel unpleasant affect.
Yeah.
But they
then construct it even further, if you may.
But what they perceive, the way that they experience the emotion is different.
Yeah.
So it's not only that it's not like the way that we use the word feeling in normal language, not in this technical sense. I think that they do not feel sadness. They have unpleasant affect, but they don't feel sadness in the normal way that we use the term. In other words, they don't perceive the emotion in the same way that we do. It's a different emotion, which has overlapping overlapping things, but not.
I agree. Yeah,
it's a different emotion.
I agree. I agree. I'm not. Yeah, I agree. I could be wrong. I'm just the feeling might probably be the same. It's just how they express that feel, or what the concept of that feeling is for them is different.
I think that Lisa would say that they would, in the normal language that we use, they would feel completely different. Not completely, but fairly different, more different than we would expect. Because their predictions for what it means to feel papaya versus sadness, what we feel as sadness, or experience as sadness, those predictions have different associations, and therefore they predict differently, and so they make one feel different because the predictions in the intrinsic, like stomach and this kind of thing, stomach and heart and feeling of your skin, and those predictions will be different.
I was gonna say, we actually proving that we actually being like very Western about it.
That's why. I mean, I said at the beginning that we weren't gonna get into it, and we did a little bit. But I think it's helpful because it shows just how nuanced it is,
how brainwashed,
and how difficult it is to get out of that, the way of being like, these emotions are inborn. It's really difficult. But yeah, so That's a little snippet into if you read the book, you will experience very many challenges at understanding exactly
Firsthand.
what things are, what she's meaning by different things. And I mean, I'm sure if we were to reread it, like we would draw on different things, but I think the core concepts are of the prediction and idea and that are fairly solid and easy to grasp. No, not easy to necessarily agree with, but they're easy to grasp when she builds a good case for them. Okay, so what does this mean for us, Peter? Our last part. So to start off with, on page 174, if your brain operates by prediction and construction and rewires itself through experience, then it's no overstatement to say that if you change your current experiences today, you can change who you become tomorrow. I think that's something you said earlier on. But yeah, we learn things, concepts, feelings, and based on what we learn or get, to use a computer sciencey term, what we train on, we then predict, and we do seemingly have some say in it. We aren't like just, there's people that would disagree with this, but it seems to me we have some control over the world that we act in, but for the most part, we are driven by this prediction loop. But if we expose ourselves to different things, we can change that for better or for the worse. Yeah. Don't know if you
No.
have any thoughts
Again,
there.
like I said, I already went through like a whole loop of me trying to explain that.
The next book.
I think it's again, it's tiptoeing, trying to not say something that's very, for people to be like, I don't believe he just said that. But yeah, it's like I said, you put it better than I did. But yeah, like, if you are mindful of your experiences, then that changes you. And I mean, I don't know, it's part of the next section on the master, which kind of like lists like things you do to better help you that. And I mean, again, probably I agreed because it's something that I like. But in addition to like exercising, good diet, and all that kind of stuff, she said, meet new people, like learn new words, like just you broadening your experience,
conceptual framework.
Just you going out there, kind of, and I mean, again, that's what and when I was reading, it's like something that I subconsciously say, which now kind of made sense to be like, no, like, I mean, as much as, which other people don't understand, when you're like, no, moving from Malawi to South Africa, like the first few years were difficult. Everyone always says, like, but no, like, greener pastures, you had better this, better that. Like, as much as that was the case, your brain is still wired a certain way. Only up until the point where you unlearn and accept certain things,
or you learn new
cultures. You tend to accept new cultures, and which she, I think, talked about something about is it like travel currents or something?
There's a word that someone else uses, but she makes a note of it in the book for, I think it's acculturation or something like that.
Yeah, which is we underestimate what that does, but us exposing ourselves to different cultures and different experiences is actually better for us in the long run.
Yeah.
We have a lot more to predict from, actually. It actually helps us define our category. They're more distinct,
Yeah.
than just a whole variation, which helps you when you're in different cultures, different environments to better understand the people around you as well. But yeah, like I said, you put it better. I was kind of just like,
I think I just read. That's all I did.
I just was like, but yeah, we, again, I'll go back to which I said earlier, that we essentially create our own environments. We create our own realities at
Yeah.
the end of the day. So if you'd like to have a better environment, you have to start by being positive about things, and you have positive predictions.
Yeah.
If you may, not saying it's easy, but it's just something to be mindful of. That
Yeah.
if you're going through a certain path, as again, like I said in not such a good way, to be like, no, if you have experienced something tragic or traumatic or something sad, the more you ponder on that, the more you utilize those networks, and then you have a path ingrained, which is the same as walking on grass. If you walk on grass, then after a long time, you start to see a path forming. And I think our brains are the same. So if we expose ourselves to negative predictions all the time, then that's the path that would be ingrained, and then
Yeah.
it's just negative emotions that we
It's a very
predict.
important idea. That if we train ourselves to predict negative emotions, so be it. It will happen.
It will happen.
Yeah, that's a very good one. Okay, so you've touched on a few of the things, but what should we do? How does this implicate, or what does this mean for us? And there are a few things which she mentions. The one is, and she says this is one of the most important things, is keeping your body budget in shape. So she says, the most basic thing you can do is to master your emotions, in fact, is to keep your body in good shape. Remember, your interoceptive network labors day and night, issuing predictions to maintain a healthy budget. And this process is the origin of your affective feelings: pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, and calmness. If you want to feel good, then your brain's predictions about your heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, temperature, hormones, metabolism, and so on must be calibrated to your body's actual needs. If they aren't, your body budget gets out of whack. Then you're going to feel crappy no matter what self-help tips you follow, just as a matter of which flavor of crap. It's just, you want to keep your body budget calibrated. She says that what you can do, practically speaking, to keep your predictions calibrated, and what can you do practically to keep your predictions calibrated and your body budget balanced? She says, I apologize if I suddenly sound like your mother, but the road begins with eating healthfully, exercising, and getting enough sleep. I know, it sounds like it's mundane or even trite, but sadly, there's no substitute biologically speaking. It's just the things that everyone says, the difficult things to do, are the things that we need to do. Otherwise, our predictions will be out of whack. I just think about if I eat a chocolate or something like that, it just spikes your body budget, and then if you eat lots of chocolate, you're kind of expecting that that's the default state, and then when you don't have the chocolate, it's body budget's like, wait, hold on a second, what's
Something's
happening?
missing.
But okay. The next one, you also touched on it, is the idea of, I think it's categorizing different emotions and having a bunch of different words, what she sometimes calls emotional granularity. So on page 180, she says, emotional intelligence is better categorized in terms of concepts. Suppose you knew only two emotion concepts: feeling awesome and feeling. She likes this word, crappy. Feeling crappy. Whenever you experience emotion or perceive someone else as emotional, you categorize only with this broad brush. Such a person cannot be very emotionally intelligent. In contrast, if you distinguish between finer meanings within awesome, so happy, content, thrilled, relaxed, joyful, hopeful, inspired, prideful, adoring, grateful, blissful, and the different shades of crappy, angry, aggravated, alarmed, spiteful, grumpy, remorseful, gloomy, mortified, uneasy, dread-ridden, resentful, afraid, envious, woeful, melancholy, your brain would have many more options for predicting and categorizing and perceiving emotion, providing you with more tools for more flexible and functional responses. Yeah. I often think of if you're sitting on the couch, and I think it was something that was in a book a while back, but regardless, if you're sitting on the couch and your partner comes in and you've had not great day, or maybe you didn't get a chance to eat, or those kind of things, and then your partner comes in and they maybe ask you to do something, and you just sort of like, oh man, I really don't want to do this. Your prediction of what the situation is you maybe are annoyed at that person, or you're frustrated, or you have this experience. And if you don't have granularity in your emotion concepts, then you can't do things like say, I am feeling hungry, not that that's necessarily an emotion concept, but I'm feeling hungry, or I'm feeling, I can't think of a good word because I don't have emotional granularity.
Well, I get you. Try to express to them that, so that you're mad at them, but it's just that you're hungry, that you're feeling that way, or you're reacting that way. Yeah.
Or you've had a difficult day, and so you are agitated from your day, and therefore you feel you maybe are presenting as if you're upset to them when actually you're not.
No, I understand that. I think I've experienced. It's the whole thing of how can I put this? Based on your experiences, you look at someone, you'd be like, oh, they're annoyed. And without you digging deeper or try to understand that, as they might be annoyed, but it doesn't mean they're annoyed at me. And then you just naturally thinking that, oh, just because they're annoyed at me.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's another aspect to it, Yeah, and she's saying, like, if we don't have the granularity, and whether it's the emotion or trying to understand a situation and nuances, the annoyed versus annoyed at me, but if we don't have those, it's more difficult to deal with situations because you don't have as many tools.
Yeah.
It's like using the hammer everywhere instead of like using a drill.
Isn't a hammer where you're supposed to use a screwdriver?
Yeah. So that's the idea of learning new emotion words. And then another one is recategorization. It's sort of what we touched on a little bit there, but it's just the idea of when we feel one way, we can look at categorizing it differently. So the common one that is easy go-to is you walk onto a stage and you feel very nervous. And so you can either say like, okay, I'm feeling very nervous, I'm just not a good public speaker or something like that. Or you can be like, okay, I feel nervous because there's lots of adrenaline in my system and I'm a little bit excited and I'm a little bit worried that things might go wrong. But you don't just be like, oh, I'm a nervous wreck and that's the end of it.
It was, I think she was talking about, what's that phobia called? People that are afraid of spiders. You can, and apparently it worked for weeks on end after that was done, but it's to kind of say, understand why is it that you're afraid of spiders, and then you'd be like, you just not saying, oh, spider, I'm afraid of it, and then that's the end of it. You kind of unpack why, and then say like, but anyways, add a positive connotation to it, and then all of a sudden you see it in a different light. So that's a recategorization of the thing.
Yeah, she says on page 187, when changes in movement and context fail to help you master your emotions, the next big thing is to try recategorizing how you feel. This will require some explanation. Anytime you feel miserable, it's because you're experiencing unpleasant affect due to interoceptive sensations. Your brain will dutifully predict those causes for those sensations. Perhaps you're getting messaging from your body like, I have a stomach ache. Or perhaps you're saying something is seriously wrong with my life. This is a distinction between discomfort and suffering. Discomfort is purely physical. Suffering is personal. Again, it has to go with that prediction. And then recategorization is a tool of the emotion expert. The more concepts that you know and the more instances that you can construct, the more effectively you can recategorize in this manner to master your emotions and regulate your behavior. People who recategorize anxiety as excitement show similar effects with better performance and fewer classic symptoms of anxiety when speaking in public and even when singing. The U.S. Marine Corps has a motto that embodies this principle. Pain is weakness leaving the body. Whenever you exercise just until you feel unpleasant and then stop, you're categorizing your physical sensations as exhaustion. You'll always exercise below your threshold despite the health benefits of continuing. Through recategorization, however, i.e. pain is weakness leaving the body. Through that recategorization, you can continue exercising and feeling better later as you reap the benefits of a stronger, healthier body. Yeah, recategorization. Okay, going on to, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the tips and stuff like that.
No.
Okay. Then I think the last parts we can go through at a very high level. There's two parts that I'd want to read just because they're interesting, and then the last part we can go through quick. So the first section here is understanding illness, and then the second is understanding law. So how how the construction of emotions impacts those two things. Okay, so to start off with illness, so she talks about chronic pain here, and chronic pain being a prediction error problem. Now, I'll caveat this with, she I think says that, I think it's this chapter. If it's not this chapter, it's another chapter, but this chapter is not necessarily facts that scientific studies have pointed to this. This is just her speculation based off of her understandings and saying this might be the case. So if this sounds ridiculous to you, that's fine. If it sounds like, oh, okay, it makes sense, or if it's helpful at thinking differently about chronic pain and depression, because those are the two we're going to touch on, then cool. But don't take it as this is exactly how things are. So chronic pain and prediction error. So she says, and she says this in quite a factual way, overall body sensations are categorized as pain, or overall body sensations that are categorized as pain, stress, and emotions are fundamentally the same. So I don't know if she has, are fundamentally the same at the level of neurons in the brain and spinal cord. So I don't know if she has information on that, like research where they've found that in the brain, pain, stress, and those kind of things are all related to the same circuitry. I'm not sure, but yeah. But she says here for chronic pain, how and why do so many people experience ongoing pain when their bodies appear to have no physical damage? And then she says, this is much like your experience with the blobby picture in chapter 2 that became B as you genuinely perceived the lines that didn't exist. your brain ignored sensory predictions. So she's saying that it's a sensory prediction error. Your brain ignored sensory input, maintaining that its predictions are reality. Apply this principle to pain, and the result is a plausible model of chronic pain. Errant predictions without correction. So, if there's always a mismatch, and your brain isn't correcting it, then you will predict that consistently. And she's saying that it's possible, not necessarily in all cases, but it's possible that in some cases, if you have back pain or something like that, chronic back pain, then maybe it's actually a physically slipped disc and that's a real medical issue.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a prediction error that isn't being corrected.
She does add on to say it's one way to look at it or think about it. It's like phantom limb.
Yes, phantom limb syndrome. Yeah, that's a good one.
To be like amputees to experience pain in legs that have been amputated. You know, it's the same as, I don't know if you've that mirror test as well.
Yes.
That's also one.
That's actually a really good one. I didn't even think of that. Just explain it a tiny bit.
The mirror test is you have a mirror. Let's say you put your left hand on the table and then you have a mirror which sort of mimics your left hand. And
You're right. Yeah. Your opposite hand.
Your opposite hand. Let's just say. But if you then touch the real hand, it would seem as if you're also touching your other hand.
If you're looking at the mirror.
At the mirror, yeah.
Yeah. Because you see it happening, and you make a prediction
that it's my left hand
happening.
That's been touched.
Yeah. That might even be one of the like studies that they use as like this is another example of prediction happening. But yeah, very good point. So she then says chronic pain is likely a misapplication of the concept of pain by your brain, as it constructs the pain experience without injury or threat to your tissue. Chronic pain seems to be a tragic case of predicting poorly and receiving misleading data from your body. Yeah, it's rough. Would not wish that upon anyone.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what you can do about it, but yeah, at least if the cool thing is like this is a suggestion by her. And now people can start saying, okay, let's try that out and let's try and experiment on that and see. And maybe it does actually help. And then you can come up with solutions to those problems based on that theory.
At the end of the chapter, I could be wrong, but she did suggest that the one thing that seems to have worked, and not that I'm endorsing this, but she was talking about brain shock therapy in most cases is the one thing that seems to kind of help in most of these
chronic pain,
not just chronic, but most of the illnesses. So it'd be chronic pain, anxiety, depression.
Yeah. I don't know much about that stuff. I know that she did say that, but
that's what I'm saying. I'm not. This is just based on.
Yeah,
I'm also not well versed.
I'm not. What I also don't understand for what she was saying there is I'm not sure how it relates to the theory of predicted emotion.
What, with the shock?
The shocking of the brain.
So, I could be wrong. This is how I sort of got. It's kind of. It's a quicker way of rewiring.
Okay.
So remember, it's like you're saying, it's predictions that are not being fed back to be like, this is an error. You know, they're not being corrected, if you may.
Yeah.
So like, how do you then correct a predict? Because if the prediction's happening, it means that there's a neuron that still fires that as being correct. So the only way of doing it is breaking that circuit.
Yeah.
So it's like when that's happening,
kind of interrupting that circuit.
Yeah, it's like you kind of check like which part of the brain is most active when the person is in that said state, and then that's a part of the brain you enter in shock to kind of,
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So and this also was related to depression, because I think that they tried it on depression patients as well. But yeah, so that's the chronic pain part, a prediction error issue where there's just a prediction error, but it's not being corrected. And then depression. So she says, but most likely depression is not just one thing. Depression, as you guessed it, is a concept. It's a population of diverse instances, which, as a caveat, is also probably why for depression the medication, like, one works for one person and another works for another.
It did say that.
Yeah.
And again, it did say kind of, I mean, that's how she was also then differentiating depression and anxiety, because depression is more of you gravitating towards past experiences.
Rumination and that, yeah.
And yet with anxiety, it's more pretty much not correcting accordingly, if you may. So
I think it's your predictions are just out of...
but that's what I mean. It's like the predictions are in a high stream, but then you're not also course correcting to be like, because I'm experiencing, for instance, if you're anxious, let's say you're driving and something comes your way, you have a lot coming at you to then course correct, but since you have a lot coming through, you're not streaming at you, you actually then you essentially, saying this also loosely, you then become paralyzed and not actually act to whatever input is coming in.
Yeah, it could be.
That's how. That's why she was like, that's the reason why most people can't tell the difference between depression and anxiety, is because all of them have to do with predict, but it's just how you handle it. Like, so with a depressive state, it's more of, this is what has happened, but you don't then correct yourself out of it in the long run.
Yeah, I think so. The error correction is more the chronic pain one.
No, but it's also underlying in both of them. But yeah, just but
I'll read it. I think she kind of touches on it, and then we can maybe chat a bit. So again, the traditional view of depression is that negative thoughts cause negative feelings. I'm suggesting it's the other way around. Your feelings right now drive your next thought, as well as your perceptions as predictions. So a depressed brain relentlessly keeps making withdrawals from the body budget, basing its predictions on similar withdrawals from the past. So it's the way that she says it, maybe she says it a bit later, but it's basically that the brain is stuck in the past. So it's stuck in the past. And then she says, in effect, you're locked into a cycle of uncorrected predictions, trapped in an adverse past where your metabolic needs were high. So if something went wrong, to use the death idea again. So someone dies and you go into a state of depression. What she's saying is possibly happening there is you had this situation that happened and your predictions were out of whack, and so your body budget just got misaligned, and then you ended up seeing like, oh, okay, well, next time when that happens again, then I must predict that my body budget is going to drop drastically. And so your brain then starts to get stuck in that loop where it doesn't ever escape the past. It just continuously keeps predicting.
Because you keep going back.
Because you keep going back,
correct your error, essentially.
Yeah, you keep going back to the past to make the predictions, which is the natural state. But you don't kind of take into account the new situation that's happening. So it is the you are right, it's the uncorrected prediction error thing, but it's because you're stuck in the past or something. And then, so in effect, you're locked into a cycle of uncorrected predictions, trapped in an adverse past where your metabolic needs were high. A depressed brain is effectively locked into misery. It's like a brain in chronic pain, ignoring prediction error, but on a much larger scale that shuts you down. It puts your budget chronically in debt, so your brain tries to cut spending. What's the most effective way to do that? To stop moving, to not pay attention to the world or the prediction error that's happening. And that's the unrelenting fatigue of depression. So, none of this is scientific fact, but it's a very intriguing idea, and it rings true.
Oh.
Because if your brain is constantly stuck in that past and it isn't able to move forward, and because it's basically shut down, and so it doesn't want to do anything, and it doesn't want to try and correct for this error, then yeah. So then she says, if depression is a disorder caused by chronic misbudgeting, then it's not, strictly speaking, exclusively a psychiatric disease. It's also a neurological, metabolic, and immunological disease. Depression is an imbalance of many intertwined parts of the nervous system that we can understand only by treating the whole person, not by treating one system in isolation, like the parts of a machine. Yeah. I think she's kind of hinting at like medicine alone is not the answer. And then just an interesting comment on the depression thing for her as well was, she says that I encountered something similar not long ago in a physician's office. I'd begin feeling fatigued for some time, and I had gained some weight, and the doctor asked, "Are you depressed?" I responded, "Well, I don't have sad feelings, but I do feel dead tired much of the time." He countered with, "Maybe you're depressed and you don't know it." And then she goes on a little bit of a speech there, and then she says, "I wound up explaining interoception and body budgets to him. But here's the thing: if he had simply diagnosed me with depression, and if she accepted it, he could have actually cultivated the feeling of depression in her at that time. And that belief might have worsened her miscalibrated body budget. And then she says, if you start to search for problems in life, you can always find something to. So that's not to say that if a doctor says that maybe you're depressed, that you should be like, no, I'm definitely not. But it is something to take into account to say, like, are they right? Or maybe they're not right about that. Because if you start believing that the cupcake is a muffin or the muffin is a cupcake, your body will predict differently.
I mean, again, it feels like I like this, but I'll repeat it again. You create your own environment. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. You create your own environment. If something is said enough to you, you end up believing. And I think they did warn about, and I know we didn't touch much about it, but we did speak about briefly earlier about how, and it goes about the whole social, what was it again? But anyway, the whole that we essentially pass on emotions and, and if we're not careful, then, we end up passing on the wrong thing. Because if you willy-nilly tell someone that they're depressed and to then believe that they are, then
they might actually become depressed because of you. And it's not only you, it's got related to their past and all kinds of things.
But it just, it coming from a profession in the field, that I think even makes it worse.
More dangerous. And she also touches on so she's mentioned the whole implications for, like, what does this mean for us? We should do X, Y, Z. And one of the things she says somewhere else is that, and it's building on what you were saying, is that when we interact with people, we should actually take more responsibility of the way that we interact with them. because exactly the same depression example, say that you're depressed, then they believe that they're depressed. But also just the way that you interact with them can shape the way that they experience reality. And not in like, I think she even uses the words, she's not in like a willy-nilly way. It's like, oh, whatever, it's just shaping reality and stuff. It's like a really, it happens. The simple idea of it is the whole positive, think of positive thoughts and then you'll become more positive. And we chatted about that a bit earlier. And I genuinely think that that is correct. It's it's walking that path in your mind, but you can also help walk that path in other people's minds, especially if you like raising kids or you have close friends or something like that. If you have a close friend that's really negative about everything, you don't have to completely disagree with them, but not trying to agree with them on the negative things. Trying to find a positive or at least neutral.
Exactly. Try to find the light in the darkness.
There's that last part with the law stuff. Do you want to just mention the two things? The judge.
Yeah, so I mean, we did speak about it earlier. So the last part is we just looked at emotions and illnesses, and the other part after that was emotions and law. And like we mentioned earlier, that judges presiding cases before and after lunch were more likely to, the ones after lunch were likely to grant people parole than those before, because their gut feeling before lunch told them that the person isn't ready to be released yet, but yet again it was just them misinterpreting their own internal feeling of being hungry,
Interception.
The interception. But it went further to say how, which was into how, let's say, if a man ended up killing their wife, if the man caught the wife cheating, like, he would end up on a lesser sentence, saying that no, he was acting out of anger, than a woman reacting the same way, because society tells us that men are more angry,
aggressive than
women. And it was it went on to say, like, I mean, for instance, the laws of the world or of our country are based on emotions, actually. Because certain things make people feel good, and that's deemed good, and things that are deemed bad or cause negative emotions, then those naturally in the law will fall under the bad side, and they went on further to say people feel differently towards people of different races, which also affects how their judgments are, how the judgment in the end. And the more interesting one was also about is it the Boston bomber? There was something mentioned briefly about him, that he was actually from, don't quote me, but he was from a certain part of the world where remorse is only triggered in certain instances, and one being when you feel you're putting your family to shame. And like during his trial, like, he did apparently write a letter weeks before his case or his he went to court, but that apparently was never read out because it was part of evidence that was not meant to be used as evidence in that. But the only time, and this was based on Western culture influence, people that read emotions from the classical view, in all his time during the case, there was no point at which he exerted or showed that
remorse.
the only time where he showed some sort of emotion that was remotely close to remorse was when his aunt was asked to speak as a character witness for him. But people said, why only then? But whenever anything was discussed with regards to the whole entire situation, there was no way in which that was shown. But she then later said to be like, no, the only reason that was the case, he could have been showing remorse, but just because he was from a different part, it was shown differently. But the one thing that also resembles remorse to them was when you're feeling bad for shaming your family, which is higher up in their culture.
Well, I think that it's an honor culture that they were part of. So I mean, like, he did something wrong, he deserved to go to jail. But the question is, like, when he goes to jail or gets put on a death sentence or whatever happens, when the judge makes that judgment, is it a judgment that has no feelings associated with an impartial, or I don't know what the word is, but a judgment that's not affected by emotion? Or was it affected by emotion?
No, that was different. To be like, he actually didn't show any remorse. So this was two different things. The one you're saying was the one after, where it was just a general discussion to say that if some, like you're saying, if some people are supposed to make judgment impartial of their feelings, is that actually really true? Because all emotions or feelings are based on past experiences. So there's no way in which you can make a decision on a case without having any influence from your past experiences.
Yeah. But it wasn't this also...
No, so this was a bit different. This was to say that he didn't show any remorse. So, So to them it was like, just because for the fact that you didn't show any remorse, then we find you guilty. So in the writer's defense, it was like, no, the only reason it seemed like he didn't show any remorse was because, the remorse they felt was not at the right time. Again, people playing judge and whatnot. To them, they felt he was supposed to show more remorse when he was being questioned about the event itself, rather than when the aunt was being a character witness. So that was one aspect to just sort of differentiate, to be like, based on different cultures, people respond differently in terms of emotions, and people are then tied to the legal part. People are then judged according to what emotions are sort of shown or presented, which can be incorrect, because they then went on to say, in another case, someone was up for parole and was very remorseful and was released, and I think it was like years later she pretty much committed the same crime at an even greater scale.
I think there was one where the guy was released, and then like the next day he committed murdered two people or something like that.
Yeah, so that was just one way to be like, how we perceive others, like what emotions we see in others. But then the one you were referring to now was the one where when a jury is selected and are asked to not be influenced by their own feelings when making a decision. How is that possible if every thought of ours is actually based on predictions of what we've actually experienced before?
Yeah.
So it can never actually be impartial, as you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, with that Boston bomber or whatever it was, the judge made a prediction error essentially because of the fact that he thought that, based on the person's facial expressions and things, that person wasn't remorseful, when actually, and we can never know for sure, but there's a chance that he was remorseful because of the letter and because of a bunch of things, like the fact that it was part of an honor culture and part of the culture where you don't show your feelings, and that's the respectable thing to do in situations like that. Whereas we would, as a Western cultural mindset, we would be like, cannot believe that person isn't showing any emotion there. They must be heartless. And I mean, maybe he was, but the pure fact that he wasn't expressing emotion in the way that we expect is not good justification for saying that they're heartless or not heartless. It's a very important point. Okay.
Cool.
Any final conclusions, Peter?
No, I don't have any like solid sort of conclusion, but yeah, just if you get the chance, read the book. It's on the longer side. Feel terrible that we're still scrambling this week when we pretty much had 2 months to read the book. Because, but I think our December holiday caught up to us. Caught up to me, anyways.
Me as well, yeah.
But no, I think we say this about every book that we read. That read it. You'll be confused. I'm still very confused. Still trying to figure out lots of things. But I think it's. I'm glad I read it. It's given me a lot to think about lately. Actually, just like you said, how be mindful. And I mean, we always say it lightly to be like, be mindful on how you treat others and whatnot. But we never stress about how we can actually affect other people's emotions, like how to be mindful about imposing emotions on others. You know, we all about treating, but you know, we forget how powerful inferring emotions on others is. So yeah, just to be mindful about a lot of things. I mean, the one which I still think it's scary is about how, you know, we always say how kids are sponges, but I think this book made me realize at what level. And yeah, to those people with children, do the best to impart the best emotions and knowledge in general, but just be mindful on how you treat your kids. The most which I know my friends would always say, like give you a baby and be like, no, speak to them like you speak me. And it always very confusing, but I think it is important because you know, they cipher out again, like I said, they hear so much noise, but then they pick up to what's said often, and that's how they construct languages and all that kind of thing. And like if you speak positively around them, then I mean, it even said, instead of just going bad girl, go try and say, I'm saying you're a bad girl because you've done and they're able to link that, okay, that behavior is not tolerable, then thus it's bad. And good, like, yes, saying I'm good because I've done, which is, you know, I should do that a little more, you know. So it's very important to really, really be mindful of how emotions are made, and just be mindful of what you put out in the world in general.
It affects others. No, it's true. And the kids one is a big one. I mean, if you teach kids healthy emotion concepts, then they will most likely have healthy predictions, and that will more likely lead to them being healthy and all the different things that in like a general society we would consider as that's a successful human being, because of the ability to predict well and learn from those, from errors and different things. From my side, I think there's 2 quotes that I'll end off and then some random comments. So she says on 285, body budget predictions laden with affect, not logic and reason, are the main drivers of experience and behavior. So behavior and experience are driven by body budget predictions that are laden, that are mixed with, full of feelings. And then on 289, she says, your experiences are not a window into reality. Rather, your brain is wired to model your world, driven by what is relevant to your body budget, and then you experience that model as reality. Your experiences might seem to be triggered by the world outside the skull, but they are informed by a storm of prediction and correction. So yeah, that's the core ideas of the book. I think we've touched on it many different times from different angles. But, and the comments that you made about children and how we treat other people, and things like what we should do to keep our own body budgets in or regulated well, and learning those new emotion categories and trying to use that wider variety of emotion categories to be able to recategorize the way that we perceive our current emotions, or to colloquially use the term how we feel. I think those are very helpful things at becoming, what Lisa would say, a master of our emotions. Because for ourselves and how we feel day to day, it will have a massive impact, and it will therefore also impact others as they predict off of our predictions. It's not, we don't construct just our own realities, we help construct the realities of others. Thanks, Peter.
Cool. Thanks, James.
We'll chat again.
Cool. Cheers.